Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name's Tom Regan. I'm the chair of the Greater Royal Oak Democratic Club. And tonight we're having a candidate forum. We've got Vincent, Gregory, Barnett Jones, and then Randy Maloney might be joining us, the candidates for Oakland County Sheriff. And what we're going to do is first we've got 3 questions for the candidates from the club. And we're going to ask them to answer those questions. And then after that, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. And then if you'll, there's a menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you click on the little icon that says participants, that'll open up a white screen on your right side of your screen. And inside there's a blue raise hand icon. And so that's what you'll click when you have a question for the candidates when we get to the point. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I've just randomly give you the order for answering questions. And then candidates, if you could please keep your answer to about 3 minutes. And I won't be really strict on timing. I find it very annoying when I'm watching a candidate forum and the moderator cuts in, time's up, time's up, time's up. You know, we won't be doing that. But if you could just keep it to about 3 minutes and try to avoid filibustering, and you know, I think it'd just be a lot better that way. And I will keep time. And if it gets much over 3 minutes, I'll intervene. But otherwise, keep it to about 3 minutes. And if you don't need 3 minutes, there's no need to take it, and we'll just keep moving that way. Our first question, this will be for both of you, please tell us your qualifications for sheriff and why you believe you are the best candidate to beat the incumbent. So that's the first question I'll be asking you. But let me ask Vincent, Gregory that question first. What are your qualifications for sheriff, and why do you believe you are the best candidate to beat the incumbent?
Okay, I've been Wayne County Sheriff for 30 years.
I'm just gonna sit right here.
President of the Wayne County Sheriff's Deputies Union, which at that time was the largest police union in the state of Michigan. I represented those officers, and I got to know the internal workings of the Sheriff's Department and how they budget their money, how we needed to move money around, and all of that. As a matter of fact, I negotiated contracts with past county executive Ed McNamara, Bob Ficano, and Warren. So that gave me a lot of experience with negotiations and being able to handle those things, and gave me the insight into the Sheriff's Department. From there, I ran for Oakland County Commissioner. I was an Oakland County Commissioner for 10 years. During that time period, I sat on finance. I sat on a lot of the committees, well, just about most of the committees in Oakland County. And then after 10 years, I ran for state representative for 2 years. I was there for 2 years, and what's memorial about that, is that during my time there as a county, as a state representative, I ended up with during my election, I ended up with the largest number of votes of any state rep in the state of Michigan. And then I ran for state senate, and during my second term, I ended up with more votes than any of the state senators, Democrat or Republican, by 10,000 votes. So for me, getting out to vote, that is key for this year's election. This Democratic year's election is key about getting the vote out. So I don't think there's any candidate that's running in this sheriff's race that has more of a background and more of the ability to get the voters than I do. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. Obviously, there's some changes in the Sheriff's Department that I would like to see, but first and foremost, we must be able to get the vote out in November in order to make a change at the top, and also for down ticket races also, and I would be able to do that. So that's why I feel I'm the best candidate for the primary for the sheriff's race.
Okay, thank you, Vincent, Gregory. And Barnett Jones, could you please tell us your qualifications for sheriff and why you believe you are the best candidate to beat the incumbent?
Thank you, Tom. I will, because I believe I am the best candidate. I have over 40 years of law enforcement experience. I am still a law enforcement officer and certified. As a matter of 6 months ago, I was working the streets in the village of Lake Orion, still plying my trade that I can't seem to get out of my system. 19 of my years were spent at the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, where I was a captain before I retired. I trained under the tutelage of John F. Nichols. I oversaw all 4 divisions of the Sheriff's Department: Protective Services, Technical Services, Corrective Services, and Satellite Services. So I know all the aspects of the Sheriff's Department. I enjoy doing what I do to the degree that I just love being a police officer. And with that in my background and with that in my blood, I believe that that is what's going to help this ticket win the sheriff's department. The current sheriff is a politician, not a bad guy, just a politician. We need a lawman in the office, someone that has worked at the sheriff's department. I've worked the second floor, booking, receiving. I've worked on the road. I worked every aspect of every job in the sheriff's department, as I said, under the tutelage of John F. Nichols. So day one, I can walk in the office of the sheriff after I win the election and be the sheriff. I won't be training on the job. I already know the job. The experience that I gathered by leaving when I retired and going to Sterling Heights as a chief and Ann Arbor as a chief, and then going on to help the emergency manager up in Flint, only gave me more experience and more knowledge. I have a associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. I have 2 master's degrees, one in technology and one in education. I volunteered on the school board in the city of Detroit and turned around and got a license so I could be a principal. And I use that when I go in and talk to the kids, because kids are the next generation. That's the very generation that is outside now protesting. Those kids want to have a voice, and we reach them by showing them your qualifications. I believe those type of qualifications, along with my experience, my education experience, and the ability for me to communicate with the next generation are the very reasons why we're going to turn out enough voters so that we can win up and down the ticket. Once again, my name is Barnett Jones, and I'm a lawman, and I believe that is going to be the key to winning the sheriff's office this year. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Barnett Jones. And then Randy Maloney, have you joined the call by any chance? Okay, we'll go on to our second question. Second question has to do with, really, does Oakland County have too many people in jail? And if you believe it does, how would you handle jail overcrowding, both during the pandemic and afterwards? And for example, do you support compassionate release for medically vulnerable inmates? Do you support the elimination of cash bail and instead only hold people in pre-trial detention if they're a flight risk or a danger to others? So Barnett Jones, could you please answer that first?
Tom, thank you. That's a good question. And absolutely. I believe when I retired from the sheriff's department about 21 years ago, we had people sleeping on the floor. When I read the newspaper, I was astonished to see that there are people still sleeping on the floor. Yes, we're still holding pre-trial nonviolent misdemeanors, and I believe that the way we get them out of jail is to give them the grace that we should have in Oakland County. And the cash bail reform initiative is a great way of getting nonviolent misdemeanors out of jail. We are housing people that don't have the money to pay tickets. So we arrest them and we put them in a jail, which causes them to lose their jobs, their homes, maybe even their families when they couldn't post bond, which could have been $500, $900. That was the very reason why they were probably still driving with their license suspended, because they couldn't afford to pay that. So I believe nonviolent misdemeanors should be released from the jail. That will open up more space so we can house criminals, real hardcore criminals, because I'm not soft on crime. But the violent offenders need to be incarcerated. Getting those nonviolent pretrial out of the jail opens up a space. And also, just maybe, it might give the taxpayers a break, because you won't have people in jail that are nonviolent misdemeanors that could be there if they got an adjournment for months on the county road, when in fact, if we utilize some technology, some tethers, and put them on the street, listen, they didn't have money to pay the ticket. I doubt very seriously if they have money to leave the country. So let's give them a break, put them outside of the jail, give us a break inside with additional space, and give them the decency of being able to keep their jobs and pay their bills if they can, and stay home with their families. And then when it's time to come to court, they'll come to court. And if not, when I'm sheriff, they do that, I'll have a CAPIA squad that will go and pick them up. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. Vincent Gregory, does Oakland County have too many people in jail? And if you believe it, we do, how would you handle jail overcrowding, both during the pandemic and afterwards? For example, do you support compassionate release for medically vulnerable inmates? Do you support the elimination of cash bail and instead only hold people in pretrial detention if they're a flight risk or a danger to others? Vincent Gregory.
Yep. Thanks so much, Tom. At this point, I cannot speak to the number of inmates in the jail and whether they're overcrowded. That is, to be honest with you, I don't know. I can speak from experience in the sense that Wayne County, at one time when when they were overcrowded, it ended up being a lawsuit, and the sheriff ended up being sued. So I know about that. And so once I get in there as the sheriff, I will evaluate to see what kind of conditions we have in the jail, if there are overcrowding conditions, and if we need to move inmates out. I agree with Mr. Jones in the sense that these pretrial people that are held in jail, anybody that's held in jail for some of these simple offenses solely because they don't have the money, it seems so unfair. And there's a movement now, progressive prosecutors, and obviously the sheriff cannot make the decision on his own. That's something that the prosecutor would have to agree to. I certainly would work with the prosecutor to make sure that those people that have been arrested and they're looking to find out there's a way that they can avoid going to jail because they don't have the money for the bond. I would certainly work with the prosecutor to make sure that these people did not have to go to jail. And hopefully the prosecutor, as we move forward, will start looking in terms of alternatives to jail as a means of resolving some of the issues of some of the incarcerations. For too long, it was hardline incarcerations. Everything was about throw the book at them, lock them up. If you arrest somebody, they're going to jail regardless. Well, I think that as a society, we're evolving from that now. And I think that with the term progressive prosecutors, if that's the case, and if that's a term that needs to be used in order to get these prosecutors to look at other avenues of how to treat these prisoners so they don't have to go to prison, they don't have to go to jail if they don't have the money, I think that's what we need to do. I certainly am very, very, very supportive of something like that, and I agree. I think that would relieve some of the a number of inmates in the jail, and obviously that's something that at the beginning of the year, once I'm sheriff, that's one of the things that I would look at to see how we can reduce the jail population.
Okay, thank you, Vincent Gregory. Has Randy Maloney joined the call? Just wanted to check one more time if Randy Maloney had joined the meeting. Okay, well, we'll go to question number 3, and Vincent Gregory, we'll have you go first this time. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen this explosion of concern about systemic racism in policing. Do you believe systemic racism in policing is a problem in Oakland County? And if so, how would you address systemic racism and policing in the Oakland County Sheriff's Department? Vincent Gregory, if you could please go first.
It's hard to say. I mean, I could just say, yes, systemic racism, but it wouldn't be fair to the officers. And you know what we don't have right now is a means to be able to judge that. We need to have records. We need to have accountability from the sheriffs. We need to have transparency from the sheriff's departments and really all law enforcement. And once you have that, once you have records kept of, for instance, the number of arrests made, the number of officers that are involved in physical contact with some of the prisoners or people that they come in contact with. Once you have some of those numbers and records, then you can look at and you can see if the department has a history of that, or is it maybe it's just a couple officers in the department. But whatever it is, we need to have a record of that, and we need to move forward with finding out through transparency to be able to have these departments document if an officer if an officer pulls a weapon, that should always be documented. If an officer gets in an altercation and has to fight, and they get into some kind of serious altercation, all of that needs to be documented. Actually, anytime we know we have police records on arrests, general arrests, but it doesn't go into much more detail. But even those records should all be transparent. We should all have a record of that, so that actually we would hope that it will be in a national registry. But if it's not, even within a county, you could make a registry where you would have a record of all the arrests are made and who's making these arrests. Then you can find out if there seems to be some sort of pattern to who's making these arrests, and if it seems like it's the same officer all the time, obviously, you know you have a problem. And at that point, it's up to the sheriff to resolve that issue. You bring that officer in and you let him know that this is something that's not tolerated, and you go through an investigation to see if this is something that is systematic, something that's been going on for years and continue to go on. And also, generally, those things don't happen in some kind of vacuum where nobody else knows about it. If there's other officers that have been involved and they know something, that's where you get into involvement, talking to other officers about how things go and how the officer has been handling some of the situations. For instance, in a situation where you have an officer that's come into contact with somebody, you would investigate, you would go through all the officers and record all the things that they said, and that would be transparent also.
Okay, thank you, Vincent Gregory. Barnett Jones. In the last couple of weeks, there's been an explosion of concern and activism around systemic racism in policing. And is systemic racism in policing a problem in Oakland County? And if it is, what could you do as Oakland County Sheriff to address it?
I do not believe systemic racism is a problem in Oakland County. And as I stated earlier, I just got off the road. I was working on the road in the village of Lake Orion 6 months ago. And we were working with the Sheriff's Department and working with other agencies. In my law enforcement career, I went to most of the departments, as a matter of fact, all of the departments in Oakland County, and I taught cultural diversity, anger management, vehicle and occupant control. I taught those classes to the majority of officers that may still be on the road. A lot of them now are command officers. And we never had a problem, but I can't say it doesn't exist, because whatever exists in the general population may also exist in law enforcement. And that's what we're starting to find out around the country. However, as sheriff, I would enter day one with ideas about making sure that the Oakland County Sheriff's Department didn't have that kind of a problem. Because one of the things I want to put in place is a citizen advisory board. And that citizen advisory board will be the first of a kind in Oakland County that would allow me to recruit citizens in all the contract areas, bring some of my command staff and my unions to the table, and we would take a look at the policies, the procedures. We would also take a look at any of the past practices of the officers to see if we got an officer that needs some help. But the problem doesn't begin there. The problem begins with the very moment we start recruiting police officers. It used to be you hired a police officer, you did a real deep dive on their background, and then you gave them a polygraph. That went away about 1983. So now you can't do a deep dive as much as we used to, and you can't use a polygraph. And then we use the psychological examination. All of those are precursors to tell you what kind of officer you may have. Because when an officer gets on the job, the generations that we have now, they still think law enforcement is kind of like what they see on TV. You can get everything solved in 46 minutes and you have time to rest doing the commercials. It's not like that. So what we're finding out in law enforcement is that we have to make sure that we do some other things. And those are old things that we used to do are the type of things we need to bring back today, to take a look at what kind of officers we have. When we have an officer that is starting to go down that deep rabbit hole because they've seen the death, they've seen the bad things, and they start to become so hardened and callous, we will then send them back to retraining and see if we can train that out of them. And then if we can train it out of them, recover that good officer, we're back on the road with a great officer again. But when you can't, this is the hard part about what a lot of people are complaining about. What took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that officer had 20 things in his personal file. We call it the jacket in law enforcement. How could that be? How could we have an officer with that much stuff in his background on the job? The reality is, as a chief, I've been there. I've had officers that were bad officers. We went through progressive discipline, and I fired them. And then 14 months later, they're walking back through the door. That is what we've got to stop. When the chief finds a bad officer and you go through everything you're supposed to go through, progressive discipline, and you get that officer gone, that officer should be gone. And not only gone from your department, the officer should be gone from law enforcement because they've already proven they can't do the job. So to turn it all back and bring it back full circle, I believe the Sheriff's Department is a jewel of a police department. They have great officers that have had great training. When I come in, I will give them more training. We go back to the old style. I'll lobby with the legislator to bring back polygraphs because that's good. We'll have psychological examinations. We'll put a citizens advisory board in place so we can find the officers that are starting to go rogue and try to help them and get them back in line, or we'll get them gone. The citizens demand accountability, and we, under my watch at the Sheriff's Department, will have accountability, which equates to transparency. You will know the Sheriff's Department is the people's department. On my watch, the citizens will know what is going on because I'll have citizens at the table next to me when we do policies, procedures, and disciplines. It will not be a secret. Thank you.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. All righty, that's all the questions we had from the club, and now we're going to ask for questions from the audience. And again, if you could click that participants icon in the window at the bottom of your Zoom screen, that opens up a white window on the right side. And then in there, there's a blue raise hand icon, and that's what you need to click if you want to ask a question. So if you have a question you want to ask our candidates, go ahead and click that blue raise hand icon. And you can either ask a question for a single candidate. If you want to just address one of the candidates, you can do that, or you can ask a question for both candidates. So while you're, go ahead and click that blue raise hand icon. And David Strang, you were first. Could you please go ahead with your question? David Strang.
Yeah, hey, my question's for Barnett Jones. I like a lot of what you've said, and whenever I've heard you talk, I like it, but there's something I have to have addressed to be able to vote for you. When you were Flint's chief public safety officer, which is a 6-figure job, you took a second job, which was also a 6-figure job, without asking the city or even notifying the city. And you said at the time to the press that that was because you could get both jobs done because you could work 40 hours in each job, which to me, when you're getting that, that's more than a 40-hour-a-week job. You know, that's not that position. So wanted to ask you to explain that to me and help me understand, you know, why you did that, and know that you wouldn't do something similar if you were the Oakland County Sheriff.
Thank you, David. That's a great question. And this will be, honestly, the first time that I get to publicly answer that question. You see, when I started at Flint, I took the job. It was a temporary job, realistically, because under the Emergency Managers Act, you never knew when you were going to be there. Although it was a 6-figure job, we had the Emergency Managers Act, and 1 week we'd have our stuff in a box, and the next week we didn't have our stuff in a box. So after I got there, after they recruited me from Ann Arbor to go there, I realized that I signed up for something that I don't think I really want to stick around for. So I put my resume out and I got job offers. And then when I got to where I was getting ready to accept a job, I went in and I told my handler that I got a job offer. And he said, listen, you know, we need you. You're doing great work. You're doing great work here. So why don't you just, I don't care what you do, but don't leave. Get these projects done. So what I did was, as I've done before, I've worked 2 jobs, full-time jobs. I've worked 2 full-time jobs and going to school most all of my life. I am a type of person that's a hard-working person. I do that. But in this particular case, I wanted to do something that I had never done. See, I'd proven myself in Oakland County. I'd proven myself in Sterling Heights, and I'd proven myself in Ann Arbor. But what I'd never done is worked in an urban community. So I took that recruiting to go up there to see if I could help the city of Flint and the emergency manager. They were desperate for getting some good people up there. I walked into an area that had plenty of corruption and a lot of other things that I'm not allowed to talk about because I had to sign something that said I wouldn't say it. But after I got there, I realized that I was doing things that were going to make that department great again. And I worked on it, and I did all those things. And at the same time, I realized that I had to call this. And in the process of working the 2 jobs, I managed to get the fire guys saved, and we got the millers saved and everything done. And I worked Saturdays, I worked weekends, I worked midnight shift. I was depriving my family of my time because I was doing what I really thought I needed to do. And in the end, when I got to the end and I had gotten everything done is when that story broke. And the story broke the way it broke was because I had outsmarted some pretty crooked politicians and kept them away from the money. Let me tell you, that is the type of person I am. I work hard, I get the job done. In Sterling Heights, I would go in at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'd still be there at 11 o'clock at night. I did the same thing in Ann Arbor. I'm that kind of worker. But if you read the article all the way down, you would have seen that they said I was always there and I was always doing my job. But they put that title there so as people would grab it. Let me tell you something that really bothers me. And it's the way it is. And it's playing out today in society. I have a friend who was a mentor of mine. His name was Chief Lee Begole. Look him up. He's a great guy. He mentored me along with John F. Nichols. And Chief Begole worked in Novi as a chief and Charlevoix as the chief at the same time for a year, 300 miles apart. I was working in Detroit as an employee and in Flint as a contract employee, 70 miles apart. I would get in my car and drive to work. But the difference is they made Lee sound like a hero and they made me sound like a scoundrel. That's the bad thing about when you look, unfortunately, like me, and I'm gonna call it, because the paper made him seem like he was great and made me seem like I was doing something wrong. I have lived with that, all because I tried to help the citizens of Flint. And today, all the work I did, opening up that jail, getting that technology, getting their response time down, is still in place. So, David, thanks for asking me that question and giving me the opportunity to answer it for the first time. But that's the type of work ethic I would take to the Sheriff's Department. I go there, I do the job. And I want to tell you, if it takes 20 hours a day to get the job done, I'll be there for 20 hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. And Denise Jacob, go ahead with your question, please. And you're still muted, Denise. I don't know if Denise Jacob? There you go.
Yes. Okay. Many would say that we are at a point of a push toward total transformation of policing in our society. Some would argue that police have been given too much responsibility and that we need to look at as taking some of what police have been responsible for and assigning it to other kinds of first responders, perhaps more from a mental health or a public health perspective, so that police will be there to respond when there's a need for the use of force. I'd like to know your opinions on where you think we are in regard to total transformation of policing and how you think that might apply within the Oakland County Sheriff's Department.
Okay, Vincent, Gregory, it's your turn to go first. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I agree with you. I do think that whoever was talking about that, I do agree that we are moving toward transitional policing. I think that when we talk about community policing, that's part of the transitional policing. I think that we, as a society, are pretty much getting away from that hard and fast rule of lock them up. And I think that the citizens themselves are looking for ways to just have police involved in those areas where they need to be involved in. And it's difficult. There's some areas where it would be, the police would be involved, and you, for instance, if somebody calls on a domestic violence, some people would say, that maybe a social worker should be there. Well, maybe they should be there in conjunction with the police officer, because a domestic violence situation can turn serious, and you don't want somebody to be there that could jeopardize them, that would jeopardize their health, that they would put them in that kind of situation. So I think that we are in the transformational period. I do think that there will be a lot of changes, and when I'm the sheriff, that is one of the areas, that's some of the things that I'm looking to do to make a difference. And if I could, I'd like to just speak just a little bit about what was said earlier, and with regards to the hiring process. When we talk about the polygraph, that is the old school, and that's what the current sheriff is talking about, and of course, Mr. Jones is talking about polygraph. We should bring that back. The reason that they don't have polygraph is the same reason they don't allow it in court. It's unreliable. Now, if you were to have a minority person going through a screening, trying to get a job, they ask him about what's your encounter with the police. Well, obviously, the polygraph would probably show him to be more tense, more excited once that comes up, as opposed to a non-black candidate. So to me, a polygraph is a way, ultimately, it could end up being a way that you would eliminate a lot more minorities because of the polygraph. And that's why I believe it was outlawed, and you don't use it anymore because it's unreliable, and it would tend to discriminate against different applicants. And to me, you never want a polygraph when you're talking about screening people to bring them into the job. But I do think transformative, I think that as a society, we need to look at different ways of policing than we had before. I think that what you've seen across this country is a demand for police departments to look at how they're policing and if they're doing everything that's necessary to protect the people, and if they're doing those things that maybe some other areas might be able to be done by some other people. And I agree with looking at that and trying to come up with some solutions for that.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. Gregory. Barnett Jones, the question was, do we ask the police to do too much? Should we move some of the work now being done by police to other agencies and people?
Tom, Denise, I think that's a great question, and that's the part of the defunding discussion that is now nationwide, taking some of the responsibilities away from law enforcement and giving them back to those people and careers that can manage it. I could tell you that we had that kind of situation in Oakland County right around 1990, before they eliminated Clintonville. We used to have people that could help us with the EDPs, mentally disturbed people. And I think that if that is what they're talking about, Denise, where you're still going to have the police there to help them, because EDPs can go from being the nice person, in 5 seconds they can be not nice, and you're going to need to have someone there that can protect them. I think that will work. I would love to see my officers have all the backup they need. Domestics, very, very, very can become violent in a moment's notice. I would love to have the type of help that necessary when you go to the homes, which is a very tense situation, because you are the outsider going into the home trying to resolve some problems that may have been going on for 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, or 15 minutes. It's very intense. I believe we're having this discussion now, and I believe it is a good discussion. But I want to circle back to what Mr. Vincent said. I took a polygraph when I came to Oakland County Sheriff Department, and I was the first African-American hired by the Oakland County Sheriff's Department for outside patrol. I had no problems getting through that polygraph at a time when quite possibly they did not think they were going to hire anybody of my persuasion. I believe the polygraph test given by trained polygraph operators, they know how to do the job and do it well. It helps. It's just a tool. It is not going to be used to totally eliminate a person. You bring in the right instructors, you bring in the right polygraph operators, you ask the right questions, along with the hitting the ground, talking to their neighbors, talking to all the people in their history. You're doing the deep dive, you put all that together, and that's how you come up with a good candidate. I believe, Denise, that the defunding of police departments is going to be on the table, and we're going to have to deal with that in Oakland County. I believe if they put the right things in place, like Andy Meisner and Mr. Coulter are talking about, so that we have places to take the emotionally disturbed people, we have places to take the people who have domestics, and we have place to take the homeless, we will be able to pull this off. I believe what's taking place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where they want to blow up their police department, is something that will not work in Oakland County, because we're too good for that, and we have so many good people in law enforcement that we can train them, give them the knowledge, give them the tools, give them the equipment, and they'll do great work. And if we find the ones that are outliers, we get rid of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. Maureen Dunwoody. Maureen Dunwoody had a question. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm going to piggyback on the previous question. When I'm a Pontiac resident, and so I see perhaps a certain flavor of police interaction in my community. And it obviously is very well connected to the grievances that we see in the protests across the country right now. I'd like to know tactically what you would do to defund, and I really don't like that term because it's derogatory, being used derogatorily anyway. What would you do tactically to deconstruct the policing in Oakland County as needed? And not to say that it's terrible, but that there are certain elements of policing that they're doing things that aren't necessarily they're qualified to do. They're not social workers. They're not public health professionals. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, given the current events that are going on, we can hear a lot of rhetoric. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, but will you be come and gone before something even happens? I guess is my question. Tactically speaking, what is a plan that says, okay, X date we might be seeing, a change in how we train our officers, or what their responsibilities may be, or how they interact with people with mental health problems, with people with addiction problems. And these are a lot of the people that end up in these positions of an interaction with the police that turn violent, or they're just arrested for walking down the street. And
Okay. I think you made your point, Maureen. So I think Maureen's asking for some specifics. What would you do to move some of these functions out of the hands of the police and into other hands, and what would you do to prevent some of the abuses that we've seen? And Mr. Jones, it's your turn to go first. Barnett Jones.
Maureen, that's a great question. And that's not a question that I believe just the sheriff can answer, because when you start talking about pulling the officers back from the domestics, somebody's got to respond. So you must have that infrastructure already in place. For handling emotionally disturbed people, you must have that infrastructure in place. Mind you, all the officers are trained on how to handle EDPs, how to handle people who are homeless, how to handle those type of scenarios. But today, we want to pull them back. That is the new discussion. And then put the other infrastructure in place. So the sheriff will be sitting at the table with all the other providers in the county to try to figure this out, how he can remove the officers, how you can remove the officers from going to domestics and let the social workers go in, from going to handling emotionally disturbed people and allowing the social workers go in, how to get the homeless, where the shelters that they're going to need to go to. But I am seeing some information, and I believe one of the candidates running for county executive has a plan for some of that. So I think it's perfect time to bring all of those people to the table. But let me circle back, because if you're seeing bad behavior from the officers, then that is the type of behavior that you should report. And when I'm sheriff, I will have a review board in place so we could take your complaint. We could handle your complaint in a transparent function so that we could find out if there is something going on, that officer needs to be retrained, or if that complaint is founded or unfounded. That is what we have to do based upon the information you gave me. If they're good officers, you pat them on the back and you tell them to go ahead and do your job. But I believe what you're saying is you see officers doing things wrong. You said a certain flavor. That is something that you should be discussing, putting it down on paper, and internally, when I'm sheriff, I would be investigating every complaint, because I'd have a citizen advisory board right there with me, and we would make sure that you knew whatever took place every step of the way, Maureen.
Okay, thank you, Barnett Jones. Vincent Gregory, the question was, are there any specific functions that you'd like to see moved out of police hands into other hands, and how would you respond to abuses, and how would you deal with them? Vincent Gregory.
Thank you, Tom, and great question, Maureen. I think that what I would say to that is that at the beginning of the year, I would do an evaluation of the department. I think that what you're asking is what so many others are asking across the country. Are there areas in the police departments that can be done by other areas, and then that money where the money was being used to fund those officers, that money could then go back into the community to help the community. I think that's what some of the others have been talking about, and that obviously requires a deep dive in the department to see which departments you can cut back on, what areas can you cut back on, where you can move those officers from. And that's something that I would look at very, very hard as soon as I take office. But I can assure you that for me, community policing and the issues that you have, one of the issues may be, and you're not alone, one of the issues may be is that there's an officer that may present a problem, but a lot of people don't want to come to the office and file a complaint. They may talk about it amongst themselves, but they don't want to talk about it, which adds to the mistrust of police departments. And that's what I think what you're seeing a lot of the country is what most of the people are saying. They don't trust the police departments. And that's something that once I'm in the office as sheriff, that was one of the key things that I will try to do, is bring about that trust within the sheriff's department and the community, so that if you have an issue, you know you have a voice, you know that you have a number to call, and this is going on here, and it will be immediately investigated and looked into. While I was with the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, I spent 2 years in internal affairs investigating officers. And I was also the union president at one time, representing officers and investigating officers. But you find out both sides and how things work. But the one thing that I can tell you is that a lot of people are reluctant to file reports. When I was in internal affairs, the one thing I would tell people all the time is, please put it in writing. It's one thing for you to tell me this, but I need to have something in writing to follow this up so that I can do something about it. But a lot of people didn't trust the department, and that's the trust, and that's what we have to, I think, work toward as a police agency, to be able to get the communities in Pontiac and other communities the sheriff is patrolling, so that you feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I know the sheriff will look into this if I let him know about it, and that's exactly what I do. I'll let him know, and he will look into it. And that's what I want to be able to accomplish as a sheriff, and make sure that you have a voice, and you have somebody that will listen to you when you have those issues and complaints. With regards to moving things around, as I said, at the beginning of the year, I will evaluate everything, and that will be in accordance with the county executive and the board of commissioners, to make sure and let them know what I see, and see if there is some areas that we can move some things around in order to maybe even bring some money, more money back into the city, to be able to help those folks that need it in the city.
Thank you, Vincent. Gregory. Arvin Reddy, you had a question. Please go ahead, Arvin Reddy.
Okay, thanks. So my friend was in Oakland County Jail in 2017, and they said the food there was inedible. And at first I thought they were just being picky, but after I did some research, I found that the company Aramark has been found to have maggots in their food, or they serve food out of garbage in other facilities, not Oakland County Jail. In order that my friend didn't go hungry, I and some other friends purchased hot food from the commissary, which is also run by Aramark, but somehow that food was much better. So the problem is that Aramark has a financial incentive to make the regular food bad, so people have to buy commissary food. So my question is, would you be open to unprivatizing the food service, so by having public employees do it, or failing that, at least have two different companies operating the regular food and the commissary? I know the argument is that privatizing saves us money, but if the friends and family of inmates have to put money, and I think those people are by and large taxpayers in Oakland County, if they have to put money in the commissary, is it really saving us money overall? So that's my question. Thank you.
All right, Vincent Gregory, it's your turn to answer the question first. Would you favor either making the food service done by public employees, or breaking it up as Arv suggested? Vincent Gregory, go ahead, please. Mr. Gregory, were you able to? Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Arv?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Vincent Gregory, we might be having an audio problem. Well, Barnett Jones, why don't you go first then? I think you heard the question.
What a wonderful question. I don't know what happened because I was gone. I had retired and moved on. In the history, the Oakland County Sheriff's Department had kitchen staff. And kitchen staff would come in maybe 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would cook wholesome meals. And all day long, those inmates got home-cooked, realistic meals according to what the rules for what the MDOC, the Michigan Department of Corrections or Jails. That is something that needs to come back. I've heard nothing but horror stories about how Aramark is, and if you work for Aramark, I'm sorry, but that's what the inmates and even the deputies are talking about. As a sheriff, I would be looking at that because I remember how it was. I remember how home-cooked meals were there and the inmates, and I know it's humanistic. We put people in jail to pay their penance back to us, the government, us, the people. But we don't put people in jail to treat them less than what they really are. And I think that what we need to do is take a look at why it was moved, and maybe if the infrastructure is still there, there are ways in which we can get decent food, that the inmates would have decent food and not have to rely on going to the commissary, because that makes it sound like we have some type of jail for profit ongoing, and that's wrong. And that's also a part of the social justice reform. We're putting people in jail like we want to make money off of them with $11, $10 a minute telephone calls to call home to mom. They get the first telephone call, they talk for 30 minutes, and then you can never talk to your relatives ever again because they got that bill. So we've got to find ways, and I believe we can find a way to put in real wholesome food again on my watch.
Alrighty. It looks like we lost Vincent Gregory from the meeting, so I won't be able to ask Vincent. Paul Weil, are you still on the meeting? Could you please try to reach Vincent on the phone and see if you can get him back on? Are you there, Paul? Okay, well, someone could...
Yeah, I'm here. I will contact him and see if we can't get him back on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, some technical problem. But yeah, why don't we'll keep moving on while we're waiting for Vincent to get back on the call. And we'll give him a chance to answer that question once he rejoins. Susanna, you had a question. Susanna, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm so glad that I've been able to listen in on this awesome little debate we've got going on. So my question has a little bit of a backstory to it. I worked in a psych hospital, Haven Mike, here in Oakland County for over 5 years. While I was there, we often had to deal with patients that were aggressive or psychotic and usually had, extremely volatile emotions. However, we rarely had to go hands-on with these patients due to effective de-escalation training. My question for both candidates, if we can get the other one back, is do you feel that Oakland County officers have enough de-escalation training? And if not, what do you plan to do to increase the amount of training they receive?
All righty. Mr. Barnett Jones, go ahead. Do Oakland County officers have enough de-escalation training? And if not, what would you do to fix it?
I know that we all have de-escalation training. I don't know what their current level is currently. I know where it was when I was working at the Village Lake Orion Police Department. And the reality about that is they have great training. Wednesday is their training day. So it's not a hard fix to put in more training of any kind because they have a mandatory training day for all the deputies to come on Wednesday and get all kinds of training. So you take a look, I would take a look and evaluate what their current training schedule is, and you can put in all the different type of trainings you need. We need officers that have the most training that they can get. And in a department like the Sheriff's Department, where you already have a range and you already have great trainers, the Sheriff's Department has no excuse, and they don't. They have trainers, they have well-trained officers, and I would just take a look and see how much they're getting, and I would always give them more. Because I believe overtraining an officer puts more into their mind, so under stress, they go back to the way they were trained, and then they'll learn how to de-escalate and talk people down. We learned all those little tactics, how to lower your voice and whisper to bring them down and things like that. That is all the things that all the officers have learned outside of the academy. Oakland County Sheriff's Department has always had a great training corps, and I would make sure that whatever is lacking, I would put more in there for them.
Okay, thank you, Barnett Jones. And now Vince Gregory, he's back on was able to get back in the meeting. I'm sorry about that, Vincent. I'm not sure what happened, but
No, I want to apologize for DTE.
yeah. Well, they have two questions for you. Did you hear the question about the food service?
I did.
Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and answer that one first.
Okay, and that's a good question, Arv. You know, when I was on the state, I was in the Senate. I was on the corrections. I was a part of the corrections division, corrections committee, and we oversaw the corrections unit. And at the time when I was there, they used to have state employees who handled all the food services there in the state. And then the state decided they wanted to go to a private corporation, private company, and then it was RMAC, and they were terrible. There were so many things that went bad with them that the state ended up being sued, and it caused the state more money to keep them. Ultimately, we had to get rid of them. But ultimately, you know, this was even a case of they hired they paid the minimum wage, so they got a lot of transit workers coming through. And some of these transit workers brought drugs and stuff like that into the jails. It was terrible. It was horrible. And ultimately, we ended up getting rid of them. So with the Oakland County Jail, it's no different. Usually, these companies hire the cheapest people that they can. The meat can be sometimes green, and they're serving it because it's a savings for them. So for me, I think that we could invest in some Oakland County employees and get some permanent people who would be there all the time that you could rely on, pay them a decent wage, and it would save you money in the long run instead of this short period where you're, you know, these people are here today, gone tomorrow, and you've got things going on. It's to me, it's looking for the future and looking for the long run. What's best for the department as far as even lawsuits go. So I certainly would look at getting rid of them. I know their record. And I know that they move from jail to prisons because they lose a lot of contracts because of how they handle the business.
Okay, thank you, Vincent Gregory. Then we'll give you a chance to answer that other question too. But first I want to point out, if you have a question, click that participants icon in the bottom menu. That opens up the participants window. And then inside that window, click the blue raise hand icon, and then we'll queue you up to ask questions. But the other question was about, to Vincent Gregory, was about de-escalation training and when officers respond to people with mental health issues. And do Oakland County law enforcement, do they have proper de-escalation training? And if not, what kind of improvements would you propose?
Well, that's again something that I'm sure Mr. Jones is much more aware of it than I am. I would say that obviously you can't have too much de-escalation training, and that's really something that you need to start out in the police academy. You need to have it there, and then it should be something that's reoccurring. You know, maybe yearly, maybe every couple of years, but it's something that needs to be reoccurring so that it doesn't get old with you. I think that everybody coming through the law enforcement should have that. And because you go into different roles, some of the officers may ultimately end up going to court. Some may go to different areas where they may not encounter that much, but it's still something that everybody that's in law enforcement, everybody in the sheriff's department should be aware of and should know what to do in a situation where if it came upon you and you had to try to de-escalate, you would know what to do.
Thank you, Vincent Gregory. Ryan Gazend, you had a question? Go ahead, Ryan Gazend.
Unmute. There we go. Hi. Ryan Gazan from Berkeley. I'm also going to be a precinct delegate, and cities like Royal Oak, Berkeley, Farmington Hills, Southfield have their own police department. How do we convince voters that the Oakland County Sheriff's race is important to them? What does the Oakland County Sheriff's race do for people that have their own police department or public safety department?
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So Vincent Gregory, why should we care who the Oakland County Sheriff is?
Well, I think that once you get to the general election, I think that right now it's you're seeing two Democrats, and we both have basically some of the same ideas, but once you get to the general, you'll see the difference in philosophies, the difference in ideas of the sheriff and one of the Democrats. And I think that when it comes to Oakland County, why should you care? Let me just say that this Oakland County sheriff, he's been there for 20 years, and all the time that he's been there, he's never promoted a woman to the rank of captain. That's a fact. So that's something that I think a lot of people will look at, because you know what, the sheriff is really the lead law enforcement person in the county. He sets the example for the county. And we talked about the polygraph and those different things that for training. He sets the example for that. Let me just throw something else out. While you said why should you care? You know, there was a number of sheriffs that came when the governor put out her memo about these her orders, not memo, but her orders out that these that she wanted some things enforced. There was a number of sheriffs that came out and said, we don't believe that you have the authority, so we're not going to do it. They were picking and choosing what they wanted to enforce and what they didn't. And there was a question about the Oakland County Sheriff and where he was at with that. Now, he says he didn't and he wanted to clarify it, but still, when it came to the golf courses, it was a fact that he said that he wouldn't send the officers out there. I think that tells you about his feeling, at least with regards to what the governor's orders are. So I think that that's something that it will be our role as candidates for sheriff to make sure that message gets out and that people understand the importance of the race. But I'll go also back to the initial issue I was talking about earlier. When it comes to election, yeah, the sheriff's race is a big race. It's a big race for us because we're in the race and we're invested in the race. But we need to get the votes out, totally out, for this presidential race. We have got to get the votes out. There's no question as Democrats, we cannot sit on our hands. We cannot say that this doesn't affect us. It affects all of us. And we've got to get as many people out as we possibly can. And as your candidate for sheriff, that's exactly what I will be doing, trying to get out as many votes as we possibly can for all the races up and down the ticket, but especially to make sure that we take the presidency of the United States back.
Thank you, Vincent. Gregory. Barnett Jones, if you live in a city where we already have a police department, how important is it who's sheriff?
It is very important, and it's very important for several reasons. But one of the most important reasons it's important for you to worry about and wonder about and take a look at who you have as sheriff is because in case of emergency, in case your police departments can't get the job done, we've had tornadoes. We've had things come that happen in our county. We lost power. In case of emergency, we will be there to back up your officers. I remember the first dream cruise that occurred in Royal Oak. They said it was just going to be a little event. I was the captain there, and I went there, and with 14 sheriff's deputies, and there were 500,000 people that showed up, and Royal Oak had no officers. So I had to close down the jail, strip the other townships, and bring those officers down to handle that event. You have great law enforcement agencies working in those communities, but we work hand in hand with them. It's important because you have a backup that's ready and willing to come down and help you. That's always been our history, and that would not change with me as the sheriff. And some of the things Vincent said are correct. The current sheriff has never promoted a woman to captain. That is terrible. You look at that and you wonder, why not? When I retired, there were 2 women waiting to be promoted. So you, in your community, you have female officers, you have female command officers. The sheriff's department has never had a female executive sitting at the table, making decisions, making policies along with the other good old boys. When I'm sheriff, we change that. When I'm sheriff, I will sit down with all of the chiefs in the county, and I want to sit down with them and talk about standardize our training, standardize our equipment, and standardize anything we can. With the sheriff's department there as a partner, so that in case things happen in the community, they don't have to worry. We'll be there to help them because we have the additional resources that some of the smaller departments do not have. And that's one of the main reasons why you should care about the sheriffs and the sheriff's department. And in this particular election, You want a sheriff that can hit the job day one. Someone that's worked there, that knows the communities, that can drive from Leonard to downtown Milford, never touch a freeway because he's done it before. Someone who's worked in the corrections, someone who's worked on the road, someone that knows how to do the job day one. And I'm that candidate.
Okay, thank you, Barnett Jones. I'm going to read a question from the chat because this is a question that's been in discussion a lot with the Black Lives Matters movement. This is to both candidates. Do you support reform of police union contracts as outlined by Campaign Zero? And by that, they would remove barriers to effective misconduct investigations and civilian oversight. They would keep officers' disciplinary history accessible to police departments and the public, and ensure financial accountability for officers and police departments that kill or seriously injure civilians. So would you favor reopening some of these police union contracts? And Barnett Jones, could you go first, please?
I think you just saw that occur today in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I believe the chief just walked up to the podium and said that I am going to withdraw from contract negotiations. We are at a time in this country where Campaign One, they want to have transparency and they want to have accountability. When you are a person of color, hey, look at me. When I'm in uniform, I've been called a black police officer. When I'm out of uniform, you don't know, you don't need, I can't say what I've been called, but I've been called them. Because in uniform, at least I'm a police officer, but out of uniform, I become like everybody else right now that is out there protesting in the streets across our country. We need to be able to sit down and put some accountability in our contracts, but we still need to be mindful that the police officers do a great job. When you have 99% of police officers come to work every day, they'll give their life up. I've been there, I've seen that, I've lost friends to do the job that's necessary. We have bad police officers. We got to get them to go back to the guardian role. We used to be guardians, and then September 11th happened. And then we got all the military stuff and vests with everything on it but bombs. We've got to go back to being guardians and not the warrior role. And once we get back there, I'm quite sure that we'll be able to bring the citizens back, because the citizens now think we're unapproachable. And Campaign One is a good step toward getting us to that, where the citizens now have trust in us and see us as approachable. And as sheriff, I would work with my deputy unions and my command unions to come to some middle ground so that we can bring and restore the trust in the areas of the community that we patrol and restore the trust across Oakland County. Great question, though.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. And Vincent Gregory, would you support reforming police union contracts as outlined by Campaign Zero to remove barriers to effective misconduct investigations, civilian oversight, to keep officers' disciplinary history accessible to police departments and the public, and ensure financial accountability for officers and police departments that kill or seriously injure civilians wrongfully? Vincent Gregory.
Right, it's a good question. That's another question that's being talked about a lot. I think that I saw in Minneapolis that the police chief there, he put his bargaining on hold while they, I guess, go through and talk things through about what they want to do. I do think that one of the first things you want to do, at least when I become sheriff, is to reach out to the unions and to talk to them about some of the things, the policies that they have. Certainly, one of the big areas is those officers that have been found guilty of, they have numerous violations and have had a lot of issues. I do think that if an officer is terminated, that file should follow him, that any of the police department that wants that information should be able to get that. That's transparency. And I think that if we look at this as transparency a lot, I think that it would take care of a lot of that. With regards to some of the other things in the contract, yeah, I would like to look into that. But obviously, that's something that I would need to do once I became sheriff, to be able to look into those contracts. And as someone And let me tell you, contracts are negotiated, but you can open up contracts even during negotiate, even though it's a CO, even though it's going through the time, you can still open up a contract. So I think that's something that a lot of unions will do that. If you know, for the betterment of the department, most unions do not want to see the department go down. And rather than that, they will sit down at the table to come to some kind of compromise, to some agreement, to be able to resolve those issues, to be able to move the department forward. It's also in their best interest that the department is moving forward in a reasonable and just manner, because without that, any officers that are lost, if you now squeeze the department down, that means that all those union members that they had are all gone now. So it's in the interest of the union to sit down and talk with you. And I believe most unions would. And those issues that were brought forward, I believe those issues could be brought about during an off year of a contract. I don't know if this would be an off year, but if it is, I believe that we could sit down and talk about those issues to resolve some of those. And I do have some definite feelings about some of those things, but I would like to see exactly what is contained in the contract to be more specific and to be able to tell you something that I know factually as opposed to me guessing about it.
Okay, thank you, Vincent Gregory. Ian Duncanson, you had a question. Go ahead, please. Ian Duncanson.
Yes, hi. Thank you both for joining us. This is definitely one of the races that I don't have a decision yet, so it's really helpful to hear from you. My question is regarding traffic stops. Numerous articles, books, etc. that I've read have talked about the harsh racial bias that's present when they actually look at the racial makeup and racial statistics of traffic stops in particular areas. And my question is, do you believe, and would you institute as sheriff a policy to make those statistics public so that the public can be aware of what the racial makeup of traffic stops is and compare that to the proportional demographic makeups of the areas in which we live?
Okay, so Vincent Gregory, you go first, please. Would you favor releasing statistics so people would know the racial composition of traffic stops?
Yep, that's all part of transparency. As a sheriff, that's one of the things that I would do. Because you know what, it also will show you if there's an officer that has an outstanding number of traffic stops and it's an officer that's stopping a lot of minorities, then that needs to be brought to the attention. It needs to be brought to the attention of the department, but also it's one of those things that the public needs to know about. You know, I just think that all of this transparency will help a lot with regards to the officers. I think that 90% of the officers are good officers. 95% of the officers are good officers. And some of these things that are being proposed will not affect these officers, not in the slightest, because they're doing a good job anyway. It may affect a few of them, but those are the ones that will scream and squirm. And believe me, those have usually had issues before, and this will just be something added on to that. But those are the ones that you want to find out about, and if you need to get rid of them, those are the ones that you want to get rid of. The 95, and I'd even go as high as even 90% of the department will be good officers, and generally those officers do not have problems with those kind of things. So, but transparency has to be a part of the department moving forward. That is part of what we're talking about. Transitional policing is transparency. You can no longer just keep things within the department and hope that somehow the citizens hear about it and they know what's going on, because you don't. So I agree. I would be in favor of that. Sure would.
Thank you, Vincent Gregory. And then Barnett Jones, would you favor releasing statistics on the racial composition of traffic stops so that the public would know if race is a motivating factor and who the police pull over?
Absolutely. Ian, I've been a law enforcement trainer since I started in Inkster. And one of the things you learn very quickly is the rules of the game. Do your job, and you do not have a bias in that car, in that uniform. So I understand that from that perspective, but I also understand it for the lights are on behind me and I'm being pulled over and I'm wondering why. Unfortunately, I've experienced that. Accountability and transparency will take that back to where it's supposed to be. You cannot have a community where police are pulling people over based upon what they see. We know better than that. Police officers know better than that. And 99% of them, maybe 95, 99, I don't know what the latest status is, but they're good officers. And they use things that are real to make a traffic stop, because traffic stops are very dangerous. But when you put in accountability and transparency, like I said at the beginning with my Citizens Advisory Board, where I have citizens that are sitting there, we're looking at the stats, we're looking at the policies, we're looking at the traffic stops, we're looking into how officers disciplinary jackets, we're tracking that kind of information. It's all there. You can see it. Plus, you bring in what the latest piece of technology is, which is the camera that's worn, the body-worn cameras. You get to dump those down every day, and you get to see those things. And you can always see the problem before the problem when you have people employed that do that. So you put the right people in place, and you monitor your officers. And then when you find that you have this, you do something about it. And like I said before, as a chief, I've done that. I've fired officers, only to have them come back. So now with some attention to this, we can fire those officers and know that they'll be gone from your department. And under the new laws coming out, they'll never be a police officer again. So transparency and also accountability will make sure that you don't have those type of officers within your department. And if you do the recruiting up front and get good police officers with great training and great equipment, and you monitor them for their safety and their wellness, you have the accountability piece where you have those officers. And with the new law coming out, where officers will have to report when they see those type of behaviors to the Citizen Advisory Board, to the sheriff, or to whomever, you will have the ability to root them out and get them gone. So that was a good question, Ian. And accountability and transparency and good police officers who will not tolerate the bad police officers, because the new law will give us teeth. We'll get them gone, and we'll stop that kind of bias taking place.
Okay, thank you, Barnett Jones. Then we'll have one, maybe two more questions, and then we'll ask each candidate to give their closing statement. So that'll be the rest of the event. Courtney Goff, you had a question. Go ahead, Courtney Goff, please.
Yes, thank you so much. My question is for Mr. Vincent Gregory. As we're seeing, in light of everything that's happening in this country, there is a demand, and we've talked about that, for some transformation to happen within our police departments, but also there's a demand for those who are serving in leadership in our government. I wanted to just have you talk for a little bit about your experience in Lansing and how you feel that will be beneficial in this role as Oakland County Sheriff.
Well, I want to thank Courtney for that question. It's an excellent question. As an elected official, let me just say that as the sheriff, as an elected official, as the sheriff, we run the department. But there comes a lot of issues that will come up. For instance, as we talked about transparency and some of these other issues, these issues may need to be addressed in the legislature. So you will need your sheriff to go to Lansing to be able to get those issues, lobby on those issues. I've been to Lansing. I've been there as a state rep, and I've been there as a state senator. So to go to Lansing and lobby for those issues is something that I know something about. As a matter of fact, I still have some friends that are in the Senate right now that I served with. So those are things that I bring to the table that would be able to help move this department forward. I think that at this point, you want someone with some law enforcement experience, but you want somebody with some legislative experience, some experience being able to move different sides, to be able to speak to both sides. As a senator, I was able to get the Medicaid expansion bill done, and that was a bipartisan bill to expand that. I was able to get that done, reaching across the aisle to get both of those done. And then also, when I was a state rep, I was able to get a bill done to make it easier for overseas military people to be able to vote. It used to be that everything had to be sent by mail. I got a bill through with both Democrats and Republicans supporting it that made it easier for them to vote. So as your next Oakland County Sheriff, I will use all my tools that I have, legislative and law enforcement, to be able to move the department forward, to be able to push the department into an area where maybe they haven't gone before. The current sheriff, I've heard him speak about he proposed some issues of changes to the department, proposed changes that he's saying now that I've done this for 6 years. Well, 6 years, he said he's proposed those. Well, he was in the legislature. He should have known how to get those done. And as a Republican, the last 4 years with Governor Snyder was both Republican House and Republican Senate and Republican governor. If he really was serious about making some changes to the department, why weren't those changes made then? Now he's saying, I proposed those, but nothing happened. Well, obviously, you didn't really want them to happen. As your next sheriff, I guarantee, I tell you, I will be there working hard to do everything I can to make sure that the things that I propose to you, that these things come to fruition. Every place that I've been, I have been able to make a difference and to move the needle on things. And the sheriff's office will be no different for me.
And thank you, Vincent Gregory. Paul Curtis. Paul Curtis, you had a question. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I see time is short, but thanks to both gentlemen for joining us. Thanks for your leadership and your willingness to step out. Really quickly, I'd love to talk about this question, but let me cut to the chase. 8 can't wait. How familiar are you with those 8 policies? Because the claim is taken together as a whole, they can reduce police violence by up to 72%, and that's a big claim. How familiar are you with that, and how dedicated are you to implementing those 8 taken together?
Okay. Barnett Jones, you can go first, please. 8 can't wait.
Paul, you got me with that one. I'll be honest with you. But as a law enforcement trainer, I'd like to see that, because one of the things I know about police officers is you put a prize in front of them, they will go for that prize. They will learn, and they will do whatever is necessary to get the job done. And the previous question was asked to Vince. People don't know that I was elected to public office. I was elected to public office in Rochester Hills. I was a city council person for 2 years. So I've developed some of those same stratagems that Vince has. I know how to work the legislature. I know how to get things done. I know how to help people get bills through, because as a city council person for Rochester Hills, you learn, you hit the ground running there. I hit the ground running there also. That was one of those, I had 2 jobs at the same time working. I've done that all my life. The reality is that as a sheriff, you develop contacts in the legislature, you have lobbyists, you keep your eyes focused, you read, and you make networking with friends to get people to get the job done. And that is what, as sheriff, I would bring to the office. Paul, you get that information to me. I'd like to read that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Vincent Gregory, 8 can't wait.
Well, I must agree with Barnett. Paul, you got me on that one too. I was trying to Google it enough time, but Barnett didn't talk about it.
Sorry, Vince.
But I will, if there's a way that we have another forum or an opportunity to speak about this, or at the next forum, I certainly will will familiarize myself with it, and we'll talk in depth about what this means and my feelings on it. So this is something that I will look up, and it's something that I will speak out about it.
Yes, Paul, is that an MCO certified course?
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that is interesting to me is we've seen some trouble with departments investigating their own department, and I'm also concerned about systems reforming their own systems. And so Campaign Zero is a leader outside of these police systems, right? That
Yes.
has put together this 8 can't wait, and it's 8 things that can be implemented quickly. And I've already heard both of you speak to some of them, affirmatively. I think you'd find them together to be really powerful. So I encourage you to spend some time looking at it.
I will, Paul, but you said something, so let me tell you about something else. We haven't been asked this question. I believe, as sheriff, I know for a fact that when we have those high push button incidents that take place, I will step back as a sheriff and allow the state police, Southfield, Troy, or any other agency in Oakland County to step to the lead and do that investigation. That's the only way you can build trust with the community. Is you have to learn and know when to take your hands off of an investigation. But if I have an officer, unfortunately, involved in a shooting, that is a time that you let another third party do that investigation, and you step back and you only investigate for policies. You let somebody else take the lead. And that is something that hasn't happened in Oakland County. But when I'm sheriff, I guarantee, as well as I'm sitting here, that's how we'll operate.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. Vincent Gregory, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yeah, I certainly would. That one of the issues, that's something that I've talked about, is when it comes to shootings or those things that are serious in nature, I would like to see the state's attorney general form an office where they handle those kind of cases, where if there's a shooting, something like that, it doesn't go locally, because even the prosecutor, if they know the officers involved in it, then there's a perception that maybe they'll get preferential treatment. I believe that it should go to if there's a shooting, it should be investigated by an outside agency and then prosecuted also by an outside agency. It should not be done by the Oakland County prosecutor if it's Oakland County sheriff's deputies involved in it. It should go outside, and I would certainly recommend that the Attorney General's office establish a unit where you could send those cases to them, who would be an outside agency to handle that.
Thank you, Vincent Gregory. Now, we're going to ask both candidates to give a closing statement, and I cannot remember who answered first. Was that Barnett Jones or was it Vincent Gregory? The first. Oh, okay. So for the closing statement, we'll let Mr. Jones go first. Mr. Jones, go ahead, please, with your closing statement.
Thank you, everyone, for being on this forum tonight. As you know, I'm Barnett Jones, and I'm running for Oakland County Sheriff. I'm telling you from my heart, I bring education, experience, knowledge, and a willingness and a passion to get the job done. I have all the tools. Those tools were instilled in me by John F. Nichols. I didn't get the opportunity to be the sheriff, so I went elsewhere, always looking back at the Oakland County Sheriff's Department because that's my home. I made myself a promise that one day I would run for Oakland County Sheriff. Every job I've taken it to expand my knowledge, my tools, and my ability. Every degree I've gotten, I did with the same thing in mind. Now is the time for a leader like me, someone who works the front line, who'll come in every day, put in multiple hours on the shift, who's not afraid to go back in corrections and work a block with the guys, who's not afraid to go on the road with the guys and girls. I am not the kind of person to stay in an office. I'm an upfront, hands-on type of leader. And I believe that now that is what we need. We need someone that can hit the ground day one. We need to move these deputies from the guardian role back to the guardian role, away from the warrior role. We haven't had the problems that other communities have had. And we will not have to have those if we get upfront, hire the best, train the best, keep them employed, root the bad ones out. As sheriff, I give you my word, we will do just that. My name is Barnett Jones. I am highly motivated and have always wanted to be the Oakland County Sheriff. This is my time to sell you on me. I'm trying to sell you the best candidate for the job. Day one, I can walk in that office and I'll be the sheriff. And there are a lot of people there waiting for me to come back too. Thank you, Tom, for the question, and thank you, Forum, for being here. My website is barnettjonesforsheriff.org, and I would suggest you go there. And if you can help me, I'd love all the help you can give me, because this pandemic has made it very hard. Thank you again.
Thank you, Barnett Jones. And then you can, Lauren has added a bunch of information to the chat about both candidates and how you can reach them after this forum is over. So if you want to reach either or both candidates, just look in the Zoom chat and you'll get that information. Vincent Gregory, we'd like to hear your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Tom. And I also want to thank the Greater Royal Oak Dem Club for this opportunity to come out and talk about myself. And so you get a chance to hear the candidates for sheriff. I know that during these last couple of years, the last couple of elections anyway, there's never really been a lot of talk about the sheriff's race. So I'm glad that there is this time. You have some Democratic candidates that are pushing hard. So I'm glad you give us this